This is the Meetinghouse with Dwight A. Moody. News, reviews, commentary, and conversation on religion and American life. Now, here is Dr. Moody.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Meetinghouse. I am your host, Dwight Moody, coming to you today from Western North Carolina. It's a beautiful part of the country. A lot of tourists come here. I hope you can make it sometime. As always, we have conversation. Today, my partner in conversation is Tom Krattenmaker. I'm going to introduce him more fully in just a minute. There he is from New Haven, Connecticut. He is the religion columnist, religion, ethics, spirituality for the newspaper USA Today, and also the director of public relations for Yale Divinity School. Welcome to the Meetinghouse, Tom.
Thank you very much. It's so great to be with you. How are you doing today, Dwight?
I'm doing very well. I've had a bout of bad health for several weeks, but I'm back at full strength and going strong, and glad to be on the show today. We have the news brought to you by Perfecto Coffee of California. I always send my guest a package of this coffee. And Tom, you tell me you've already gotten your coffee.
Yes, I can vouch for the truth of what you just said. I got my coffee.
You got your coffee.
And it's what I drank this morning.
No,
it's good. It was really good.
It is good. Normally, if people get it 2 or 3 weeks after they've been on the show, I got a box. I ordered myself a box of coffee, and I'm going to open it right here. Here it is.
A magic moment on television.
A magic moment. Here is the coffee made by a company out in California. These were students of mine, Tom, at Georgetown College, and they left Kentucky, went out to California, and started their company just as the pandemic hit last year. And I began promoting their coffee and sending it to all of my people. And I hope listeners today will order some, perfectocoffeeinc.com, and you can order your own. They're the sponsors of the news, and I've got 5 news stories today, as always. And Tom and I are going to talk about the news as we go through it today. If I have time at the end of the show, I've got a commentary, if we get to it, called Bucking the Trend. From Washington, D.C., always there's stories from Washington. 1,200 participants gathered for the annual Conference on Global Religious Freedom. It was organized and led by private sector entities instead of governments. That's a shift. Representatives from both Democrats and Republicans, from the House and the Senate, and from both the Trump and Biden administrations have made this event about as bipartisan as possible. Among the things that were discussed were the plight of the Uyghur Muslims, the Nigerian Christians, and the Ahmadi Muslims, all groups that are under pressure, living in violence. Melissa Rogers, representing the White House Office of Faith-Based Initiatives, announced that President Biden is close to naming a person to be the at-large ambassador for international religious freedom.
I'll chime in for a moment, if I may,
Yes,
Dwight.
sure.
I just want to say that I'm glad it's bipartisan, because as I will argue in my next USA Today column, religious freedom should not be seen as a prize only for conservatives. Religious freedom is a right for everyone, irrespective of our political leanings or which religion or belief system we follow.
You know, in the last few years, religious conservatives in America have felt persecuted. As a matter of fact, almost all of the surveys of religious people in America have come back with this data that they feel persecuted and marginalized. And so they have asserted their need in America for what they call religious freedom. It's a very peculiar shift in the way religious freedom is understood in America. But so when is your next column coming out?
Probably in a couple of weeks. I have to start writing it tomorrow. After you and I talk, I'm interviewing somebody for the piece. and I'll get busy with drafting tomorrow morning. But it is going to focus on the fact that religious freedom is for everyone. And I'm going to encourage religious liberals to start invoking religious freedom more frequently and more boldly.
It has been historically a liberal value.
Right. It's something for religious minorities. I mean, there are many
Right.
famous cases involving Amish, Muslims, etc. But it's really changed in the most recent time period, as you pointed out, Dwight. And it tells you a lot about the changing position of white evangelicals in the culture and their sense that they had to start invoking religious freedom as a form of protection for them.
That is the big shift right there, and I'm sure you'll draw attention to it. But religious persecution around the world is a problem.
That is really a problem.
It is really a problem because religious identity is so tied to ethnic identity and tribalism and political identity, and this has been true in the Middle East between Sunni and Shiite Muslims. It's been true in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, and now, of course, between Christians and Muslims in Africa. It's a problem all over the world, the need for, I'm glad you're writing on it, Tom.
Right, and you've called attention to the reality that we shouldn't trivialize religious persecution. When we hear it in the United States, it's probably an exaggeration that's designed for political benefit. But it's a real thing, a real terrible thing around the globe.
It's a real terrible. People are.
Let's not trivialize it.
Yes, people are really dying and being killed and being persecuted because of their religious identity. And I'm glad you're writing on it. Another Washington story: two prominent white evangelical congregations. Speaking of evangelicals, Tom, two congregations are in turmoil arising from a change in pastoral leadership. Outside of Washington, D.C., the famous and influential McLean Bible Church, once led by Lon Solomon, now under the leadership of former Southern Baptist David Platt, is in a dispute, evidently, that's headed to civil court. It revolves around the supposed wokeness of the pastor and the effort to elect new elders. In Minneapolis, the congregation, once headed by the influential Reformation Baptist pastor by the name of John Piper, his successor, Jason Meyer, resigned last week, the latest in a series of staff and pastoral departures there, much of it fueled by charges of a leadership culture that involves bullying, domination, and inappropriate behavior. The church in Minneapolis has struggled to respond to the cultural winds that are blowing, especially Black Lives Matter and the local death of George Floyd.
Let's go back to that pastor, David Platt, for a minute.
Yes.
Wasn't he in the headlines in 2019 when Trump came to his church, kind of unannounced and very spur of the moment? Reverend Platt prayed for him.
Yes. I actually reported on that here in the Meetinghouse. Platt was not a big fan of Trump. And the prayer, though, was it was not the kind of prayer that he would have gotten, let's say, First Baptist Church, Dallas.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
And he never endorsed Trump.
Never endorsed it. It may have happened right during the campaign.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I thought he handled that well. And come on, pastors should pray for people, should pray for everyone. So I didn't have a beef with him praying for Trump. I mean, he wasn't praying for Trump's reelection. But man, apparently he's under a lot of pressure. And I really lament that there's so much panic and defensiveness these days around our country's renewed commitment, or the renewed commitment of some in this country, to face up to racism, the racism we had in the country's past and present. I've heard you talk about this, Dwight, and I know you feel kind of the same way, but we need to liberate ourselves and our fellow citizens from this oppressive dynamic. And as you said, Dwight, this reality of systemic racism, it's something we're all tangled up in, very much including white folks. And it's causing so many panicky sources of confusion and anxiety right now.
Yes, my listeners and viewers remember that I attended the Southern Baptist Convention as a journalist last month and reported on this. The issue in both of these churches, Minneapolis and Washington, is connected to this rise in racial rhetoric and Black Lives Matter and all of this wokeness. I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago. Yes, I'm woke. But you say that in some circles and you get tarred and feather. And this is really what's happening with David Platt, evidently. I'll be following that story. We'll see if, of course, the pastor up in Minneapolis has resigned, and we'll see if David Platt can weather the storm where he is. From Rome, Pope Francis has renewed restrictions on the use of the Latin Mass, discouraging networks of conservatives around the world and in the United States. The Latin language for the Catholic Mass used universally around the world until the mid-60s was replaced by local languages or the vernacular, a decision of the Second Vatican Council, 1962 to 1965. Catholics who pushed back against the modernizing reforms of the council have gravitated to the Latin Mass as a means of protest. Two previous popes, that is John Paul and Benedict, allowed the Latin language in the Mass, but Francis has now prohibited it, claiming it is being used to divide the church. Permission to use the Latin Mass must be secured from either the Vatican or a local bishop. And already there's a lot of grumbling about this. The Pope is not subject to kind of being pushed out of office like Baptist pastors are, but the Catholic Church has as much controversy in it as any evangelical network, that's for sure.
Right. And ever since Francis became Pope, he's been contending with this resistance that he gets from the right.
Right. From New York, to really change the subject, the heavy metal band Iron Maiden released an animated video drawn from two powerful biblical images. The story in the book of Daniel, which is the Hebrew Bible, of the handwriting on the wall, and the story in the book of Revelations in the Christian Bible, the last book of the Bible, of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. The 7-minute plus video is called The Handwriting on the Wall and is their first release in 6 years. A verse echoes biblical themes, quote, "A tide is changing, a tide of change is coming, and that is what you fear. The earthquake is a-coming, and you don't want to hear." The chorus runs like this.
Can you sing that part for us?
Actually, I can't, but we're going to play it in just a minute.
Okay.
And you're going to be able to hear it. We're going to play the video at the end of the news. But the chorus runs like this. Have you seen the handwriting on the wall? Have you seen that writing? Can you see the riders on the storm? Can you see them riding? Can you see them riding next to you? I've actually listened to the whole video, and while it uses this imagery from the Bible in a very powerful way, it's not real clear what dangers they are trying to warn us of. We're not going to play that.
We're talking about Iron Maiden, right?
Yes.
I remember them from my youth.
Yes.
Heavy metal band. I think they came out of England.
They did. London.
They came on the scene in the 70s.
1975. You've got a good memory.
But you're saying that they're not, quote unquote, a Christian rock band? They haven't.
I don't know. I actually did some research on them. I do not know, but I've always been interested in why artists, performing artists, visual artists, employ religious and biblical images and themes in their work.
Well, that makes sense to me. I mean, I'm sure you would agree that Bible themes have resonance well beyond the walls of institutional church.
Very much so.
Poetry, powerful imagery. So it makes sense from that standpoint.
It does. And of course, these are two of the most iconic scenes and images out of the Bible, the handwriting on the wall. Many people will use this phrase. They have no idea it comes from the Bible. The 5th chapter of the book of Daniel, as a matter of fact, is the big feast of Belshazzar. but people don't realize that that's where it's from. And even the four horsemen of the apocalypse, people will use that in everyday language, and they many times don't know that this is an image out of the Bible.
Yeah, and it was used for the new atheists, the
It
four
was.
horsemen of the new atheism, which was something that I heard a lot back about 10 or 15 years ago.
Finally, a story with actually just out of my personal life, not really national and earth-shattering, but out of Hendersonville and Owensboro. These are not big stories except to the local congregations involved and to me. Providence Baptist Church in Hendersonville, where I currently serve as the Sunday school preacher, is celebrating its 20th anniversary this coming Sunday. The lead preacher for the day is the founding pastor, Gail Coulter. The following Sunday, I will be the Sunday preacher at Third Baptist Church in Owensboro. We just showed you that picture. I served as pastor there from 1991 to 1997, and during that time, I helped celebrate their centennial. Now it is year 125, and I will be back in that pulpit to give voice to their mission and ministry. I'm really looking forward to it. I've heard from a lot of the folks in Owensboro, and I look forward to that day. Congratulations to both congregations.
And I want to say congratulations to you and to both congregations. Great.
Thank you. That's all the news, sponsored by Perfecto Coffee of California. You can order some at perfectocoffeeinc.com. We're going to take a short look, not the whole 7 minutes. We're going to take a look and listen at the video, Handwriting on the Wall, and I'll be back after that with my guest, Tom Krattenmaker. Well, that's an unusual addition to the Meetinghouse, quite a contrast from our normal music, simple gifts. You're in the Meetinghouse. I'm your host, Dwight Moody, coming to you over Rejoice Radio in the Golden Isles of Georgia and through the television network of St. Stephen's Baptist Church of Louisville, Kentucky. My guest today is Tom Krattenmaker. We've been talking about the news. Tom and I are in the same business, observing and writing about ethics, religion, spirituality, and public life in America. Tom, you recently wrote about abortion, haven't we all from time to time? And this is what you wrote, quote, "Don't be surprised if more than a few anti-abortion word warriors do as the Obamacare demonizers did and shy away from real action if the Supreme Court clears the way to an abortion clampdown. Saving babies, they'll find, isn't as simple and thrilling in reality as it is in the rhetorical world," end quote. Pretty strong statement. In fact, as the whole column was, Tom, I thought it was great. Tell us what you mean to say in that column.
My commentary has everything to do with the difference between the real world and the rhetorical or political world. You know, when it comes to Republicans and abortion, it's my view that the action has all been rhetorical and political. Ever since the beginning of the Christian right in the late 70s, this issue of abortion has been a big focus. It's yielded a ton of political utility for conservative political leaders and operatives. Now, I'm not saying that's insincere or completely calculated. I know many people who oppose abortion on principle. They're as sincere as can be. But here's the thing. Politicians keen on exploiting this issue have been protected from the real life consequences of their really extreme anti-abortion rhetoric, increasingly extreme rhetoric. And why is this? Well, because Roe versus Wade has made a post-abortion world impossible. It's made it merely an abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say in the piece, if the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, anti-abortion political operatives probably would come to rue the end of Roe. Suddenly they'd have to face the reality of their rhetoric and the very harsh consequences we'd see on the ground, and probably a very fierce backlash and a lot of political consequences.
You know, you draw a parallel to Obamacare. The Republicans were against Obamacare, but then when Trump is elected and they controlled both the House and the Senate and had the authority to either replace it with something, as you point out in your column, they didn't, because Obamacare, like abortion, has the support of the majority of the American people.
Right. Another case where, hey, it's great as long as it's rhetoric and political action and getting people riled up. But what happens in the real world when the rubber meets the road? Or as they say in the piece, what happens when the dog finally catches up to that car that it's been chasing? What does it do then?
Well, you know, all of us have been following the court. Hardly a day goes by that I don't read an article about what the court's going to do about this or that or the other. It was an article yesterday about how the functional Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is Clarence Thomas. I don't know whether you saw that or not.
I didn't see that particular piece. What an interesting concept.
But the thing I'm interested in is what I call the Catholic court. 6 of the members now are Catholic, first time in our history. What does it mean to have 6 Catholics on the court? Have you thought about writing about that, Tom?
No, but thanks for the column idea, Dwight. I might have to look into that. And so it's true. 6 Catholics is amazing when you think about it. When you think about the political history, cultural and religious history of this country, 6 Catholics on the Supreme Court. It's like, wow. And really, you might even say 6.5, given that Gorsuch has a strong Catholic background.
He does, right.
I think he's an Episcopalian now, which makes him the only Protestant, by the way, which is another fascinating thing about the composition of the Supreme Court, right?
It is so fascinating. And with all the political power that evangelicals have had over the last 50 years, they have not been able to get a single member of their tribe on the Supreme Court. I find this very odd.
I know, and you'd think there'd be more hand-wringing about that, but
it's not something
I hear a lot about.
They like these Catholics because they're so anti-abortion.
Right, and there is a long history of conservative Catholics and white evangelicals in this country being sort of partners, allies, co-belligerents, as it's put sometimes. There are important differences theologically, but when it comes to politics, there's definitely kind of a mutual trust and alliance.
Now, here we are talking about religion and
Sorry, we're having a bit of a technical difficulty here for a second. Give me 1 second here. Looks like Dr. Moody is frozen for a second. Dr. Moody, if you can hear me, if you could go and unmute your other phone, that would be fantastic. Let's see. Sorry about that, you guys. We are working through a small technical difficulty right now. Oh, here we go.
Tell us about your journey and how you got involved in writing about religion in American life.
I will be happy to do so. I'm glad you're back with us. I just had one more point to make about the Catholic court, if I may, because we froze for a minute. I'm not sure what you've been saying the past minute or so, but a key point that people should remember is that whether it's the so-called Catholic court or Catholics in politics, we have to remember Catholics are not monolithic, whether it's jurisprudence or politics or whatever the issue is. And remember that one of the Catholics on the court is a liberal, Sotomayor. But what matters about the Catholics on the Supreme Court is their conservatism. And that's what's most likely going to affect their decisions in the future, their conservatism, not their Catholicism. So my journey, right? I'll be happy to talk about that for a minute. Dwight, I always wanted to be a journalist, an opinion columnist, to be more precise. I don't know if you know this, but I was a reporter in my 20s. I was a reporter for the Orange County Register in California, and then the Associated Press in 2 different cities. I gave that up when I was about 30. That was mainly for parenting reasons. And at that point, I started working in higher ed, which is where I continue to ply my trade, my day career, if you will. But I remained very interested in journalism and writing and kept some writing going on the side. Now, what made all the difference for me was this great program I did at UPenn in Philadelphia. I did a Master of Liberal Arts degree with a concentration in religion in public life. And that's what got me going in terms of being a commentator about religion. I finished that program in about 2004, I think. Before that, I never had a strong interest on the surface, at least. When it came to religion, I wasn't a religion writer. My friends wouldn't have known me as someone who talked about religion a lot. But I was drawn to that subject because of my journalistic instincts and senses. I sensed that the conflicts around religion and public life were many, and they were interesting, and they were important, and they weren't going away. And I had some righteous indignation about what I saw as the misuses of religion that were happening in politics. I wanted to speak out. So this religion opinion writing started out as a journalistic thing for me. It was a good story, but of course it grew well beyond that and became something of great personal meaning for me too.
You wrote a book about it, about your own religious Confessions of a Secular Jesus Follower. Came out 5 years ago. I remember very much reading the book. I read it. In fact, he has interviewed you online. Tell us about the book.
Yeah, I remember that moment. As I recall, you had me join you and a group of pastors, and we talked about the book. And so I really appreciate that. Thank you. That's one of many things I'm grateful for. It was such a privilege and a joy to have a chance to write that book and do it for a major publisher. The book really was the culmination of much reflection and many conversations in which I worked out and found a way to articulate my own hybrid religious identity, or my values identity, if you prefer. For many years, I've identified as a secular person, but I definitely have a spiritual side. What do I mean by spiritual? Well, I strive to dedicate myself in my life to a cause or to causes that are larger than myself. As concerns religion, I don't identify with it explicitly, but I will say that I'm a fan of what religion is at its best and what it does in society at its best.
And you wrote this book. You were fascinated by Jesus. You called yourself a Jesus follower. And as I remember, you went through a whole series of issues, social issues, and asked the question, what would Jesus do in this situation?
That's true. Trying to apply the teachings and the example of Jesus onto the many, many things that vex us as human beings today, individually and collectively, whether it's anxiety, which was a really important issue for me, whether it was the obsession with winning in politics or hate in politics, whether it's racism, whether it's sexual misconduct. And it's amazing how well this set of teachings from Jesus from 2,000 years ago map onto our maladies today. And the book was a chance to work through all of that and talk about sort of my own spiritual journey and the discovery of my own hybrid religious identity. A huge aha moment for me was when I attached secular and Jesus follower, put those two together. When I remember the moment very distinctly. I was having a conversation with one of my evangelical friends about religious identity. And when I said it at that lunch, a light went on in my head and I thought, that's it. That's exactly what I am. I finally have the right words. And the book did grow out of that.
It is a great concept. And I think there are many, many people in America who would embrace that identity, that maybe have a religious background, but are not participating in a religious community now. but
Yeah, and
find
they've been the
in,
real supporters of the book. And
yeah.
it's been really wonderful to hear from a lot of them over the, what is it, 4 or 5 years
Hmm.
since the book came out. Just this week, I'm corresponding with a guy who sought me out. And so
How
that's been
neat is
gratifying. Not everybody has loved the book, Dwight. I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that.
No, I'm
I have a
sure.
good relationship with some parts of the evangelical world, and some of those pastors and writers were very supportive, and they thought it was awesome that Tom cares so much about Jesus. But there were others in that world who pushed back very vociferously, saying that, Tom can't do that picking and choosing that he wants to do. He has no business talking about Jesus. But then interesting and kind of disappointing was the response I got in some secular circles.
Really?
I discovered to a degree I hadn't expected that that name or that word Jesus is kind of radioactive for some people. It's kind of a shame. But for some audiences and conversation partners, they couldn't get past that. Even if they resonated with the values that I was ultimately unearthing in that book and in my pursuit of Jesus, they were like, why do you have to bring Jesus into it? And for them, that name or that word evokes all kinds of things that they find off-putting or problematic or anxiety inducing.
I'm sure that's true, but I think overall, uh, a larger group of secular people are attracted to Jesus when they're not attracted to religion than the other way around. It's like the famous thing that Gandhi said: I like your Jesus, but I don't like your Christians. And I think there are a lot of people, well, in my work as a pastor, I deal with a lot of people who are sick and tired of church, but they still love Jesus. And I do think that there is a great reservoir of admiration for Jesus, and even adoration of Jesus among people who've kind of given up on church life and organized religion. So I think that's the bigger group.
And
And
I
that,
found in secular circles, and as you probably know, I've participated in organized humanism a bit in recent years, and I've written several big articles for the Humanist magazine.
yes,
And I would posit that among humanists and other secular people, the values of Jesus resonate,
right.
but just not under that banner of Jesus, and they might
Mhm.
not even think of them as Jesus values.
But
Those
values like
values have a lot of resonance and applicability, and I think they're so transformative.
they are values like simplicity and compassion and generosity and courage and self-sacrifice, these kind of things, which Jesus, of course, and hospitality to people in marginalized groups.
Absolutely, and the biggest
This,
one for me is how we treat those who have the least amount of power and privilege and status. That's really become one of the biggest takeaways from examining the life and example of Jesus. How we treat people who, and when I say we, I mean people like me who are
sure,
white and have a pretty large amount of privilege.
yeah.
How do I treat the people I could mistreat and get away with it? And this for me has become really the ultimate test of character. And it's very much a Jesus thing, how we treat the least of these.
Well, that's right in the center of course, Jesus' teaching. As a matter of fact, a lot of Christians don't like it because Jesus said, on the great judgment day, if we can use another powerful image from the Bible, God's going to separate the sheep from the goats, and it's not going to be by the doctrines you believed or the church you attended or the sacraments you participated in, but these things: I was hungry, you fed me; I was a stranger, you took me in; I was in prison, you came to see me. Those are the things you're talking about, right?
And those are some of the most powerful and
They are.
insightful observations that I
Right.
know of anywhere in the great
Anywhere.
bodies of literature and wisdom and teachings from the ages. I mean, that is powerful stuff and challenging stuff, Dwight. I mean, it kind of goes against the way we want to live.
Well, I remember telling you this 5 years ago when we were talking about your book. Many of us, especially in part of the Baptist tradition, the basic definition of being a Christian is not whether you've been baptized or converted or a church member or you go to the sacraments. It's, are you following Jesus? Jesus said, come follow me. Come be my disciple. So I remember telling you then, I said, you know, people who are trying to follow Jesus are Christians. That's what I mean by being a Christian. I wrote my column this week, as a matter of fact, on interviewing a young college student who got to talking about her parents. And she said, if you were to ask my parents if they are Christians, they will say yes. But if you ask me if they're living as a Christian, I would say no.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this gets right at the heart of your whole book, of what Jesus taught.
Yeah, and some
Anyway.
people have said, no, Tom, what you're doing is not legitimate. That's not Christianity. You're not a Christian. And I'm thinking, who said I was trying to earn the label of Christian or qualify as a Christian? I'm neither for nor against that. I'm interested in Jesus.
I know. He's a fascinating character. Now, you're writing for a very important publication in America. And what kind of parameters do you have from your editors about what you can write on?
With USA Today,
yes,
it has to be very timely and very newsy. When I first started writing for them, and oh my God, that was like 15 years ago, they used to have a whole page on Mondays in the opinion section dedicated to religion and public life. You might remember that.
I do remember.
And that was very instrumental in my getting started as a religion writer and opinionator, because I discovered that just when it was starting and got in on the ground floor.
Right.
And that editor, John Sinif, meant so much to me. He helped me a lot develop my game, and he was a great editor. And he's not at the paper anymore, and they did away with that series. So I've had to adjust, and now I compete with all the other issues and all the other writers for every day of the week. And that's fine. It's a great privilege to write for them. I reach hundreds of thousands of people who would otherwise never know about me and see my work. And they're politically and ideologically diverse. And so that's a privilege. But there are definitely parameters. It's got to be, the pieces have to be very related to what's going on in the news and headlines. And they have to be super timely. You can't just write essays about things that are of import, say over the past decade or 5 years. They got to be now.
It's interesting you say that they discontinued that whole page. This is a pattern all across the country, because at one point, many newspapers had faith and values pages.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, the person who started this was Bob Mong, who was the editor at the Dallas Morning News. And he became a friend of mine when he came to Owensboro, Kentucky, where I was a pastor. Their newspaper had bought the Owensboro paper, and he came to town. He's now the president of the University of North Texas at Dallas, but he was the one that really pioneered these faith and values pages many years ago. But they've all been discontinued almost everywhere, as papers have had to cut and slash in order to stay viable.
That's a shame.
I hate to see it, because religion continues to be such a powerful presence in the United States. You mentioned you got started on the ground floor 15 years ago. Now, I want to go back and kind of rehearse how you and I met.
Oh, yeah.
It was 2000.
That was a lot of fun.
It was in the fall of 2006, and you must have been a brand new writer for them.
I was brand new. So it was the fall of 2006. I knew it was early on in my Portland days, but that's very early on.
Very early. And I was driving across the country with my wife. We were on a 13-week road trip. And I picked up the USA Today newspaper somewhere in Colorado and read your article. And I loved it so much, and it gave your identity down there as in Portland, Oregon at Lewis and Clark College, right? What was your role out there?
Associate VP for Public Affairs.
Associate VP, and it gave your email, and I just, in the car, wrote you and said, I'm coming to Portland. We were already planning to. I did. I said, and you said, come see us at Lewis and Clark. And you were so gracious and so hospitable, and spent the whole day touring us around. And
Yeah, and we
having
had
lunch with us.
lunch
We
in the
did.
campus eatery. That was so cool that you visited me, and we both remember it.
I do remember it, and it started our friendship. I followed your writings ever since, and you've moved over to Yale Divinity School now.
Yeah,
And what
I
are you
have. It's been about 6 years now.
and what are you doing at Yale?
My title is Director of Communications, and I think you know what that means. I try to put together the content and the messages that help the alumni body and the university and the church world know what's going on at Yale Divinity School, and to think of us in a positive way and to appreciate our contributions, which frankly mainly happen through the work of our graduates.
Sure.
But there are all sorts of people out there working as pastors or as nonprofit leaders or in academia, even in business, who went to this school and either got a MAR or an MDiv.
Well, Yale, of course, one of the premier divinity schools in the country for years and years. I don't know when it was founded, but it was one of the very
We're
first, I'm
coming up on
sure.
our 200th anniversary.
Oh, really?
But many would say that Yale University itself was a divinity school or
It
something
was.
like that when it was founded in the early 1700s. But as a distinct entity within Yale, the divinity school is almost at that 200-year mark.
Yes, and I have known a number of graduates of Yale. I've been on the campus many times back when I was promoting the Academy of Preachers. I remember coming on and
Time to come again now that more in-person life is possible again.
I know. Things have been shut down, and of course, the whole dynamic of divinity schools in America has changed. You mentioned just a minute ago how some of the graduates are pastors and working in congregations, but increasing numbers of seminary graduates are not going into congregational work and denominational work. They're going into nonprofit work and other sorts of pursuits equipped with a strengthened religious identity and moral discernment. And
yeah, we talk about the formation, the ethical and spiritual and theological formation and that training. And what you're talking about reflects sort of a broadened definition of that word ministry.
it does.
Like ministry can take different forms. It doesn't just mean pastoring a church. And this is still a Christian divinity school and will remain so. But in a way, it's like different ways of promulgating or propagating those values of Jesus and of Christianity in many different kinds of settings.
Yes, I have a student who was my student at Georgetown College who went to divinity school and got a 3-year MDiv degree and then has ended up working for the National Geographic, of all places, traveling the world. I hear from her from all over the world, but many people who get a divinity degree end up doing many other things. As a matter of fact, some divinity schools have joint programs with law. You can get a law degree and a divinity degree, or with social work. That's quite common. And some of them now, even in business, you can get
I was going to mention that.
Yeah.
And so one of the things about being at Yale is the amazing professional schools that are here, such as the School of Management, the business school, and the School of the Environment. And the Divinity School has joint degrees with both of those, which is a really powerful combination. An interesting cross-collaboration with the School of Medicine and that really powerful nexus between spirituality and medicine. That's kind of a lively area here too at Yale.
It's lively all over as doctors and researchers struggle with the boundary, the ethical dimensions of what they're doing. And then, of course, there's the whole realm of chaplaincy, which I'm sure over the years, many graduates of Yale have gone into the chaplaincy in any of its forms. Well, you're doing great work, Tom. And I continue to read your stuff and stay in touch. I should tell all of my listeners that Tom serves on the board of advisors for the Meetinghouse, and I've appreciated this. And as a matter of fact, the man who I mentioned just a few minutes ago, Bob Mong, who's now the president of the University of North Texas at Dallas, he also is on the board of advisors. And I hope you get to meet him soon.
I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you for being in the Meetinghouse, Tom. I'm going to come back in just a minute with my commentary this week called Bucking the Trend. Let's take a break.
Thank you, Dwight.
Were you raised in a Christian family? I asked the stranger who sat across from me this past Sunday following church. No, she replied, but if you ask my parents if they are Christians, they will say yes, but they don't live like Christians. It was the opening exchange between two young ladies, both college students this fall, and one old preacher, that's me, a man filling the pulpit, as we say, at a small church in North Carolina. I was surprised and pleased at her frankness, but now know it was just the beginning of her hour-long confessional about love, life, and religion. They're about to disown me, she explained later, and when I asked why, she said, they can't stand the gays, and I don't feel that way. They're upset with me because I don't hate gays, end quote. It's hard to know how to place her and her friend, who had a very similar story, within the wider demographic of their generation. It is Generation Z, those born in or after 1995. They're distinguished from the millennials. Those are people who are born between 1981 and 1995. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. And the boomers, that's my group. I was born in 1950. This young lady that was sitting across from me was born in 2001. They are the most secular group yet, these Gen Zers, I call them. In fact, it is the first generation that is more secular than sacred, more unaffiliated than affiliated, more unbelieving than believing. Sociologist Ryan Burge published the statistic last week. 45% of Gen Z are nones, N-O-N-E-S. That is, they answer none when they're asked of their religious affiliation or preference. That compares to 25% of my generation and 19% of my parents' generation. The two young ladies sitting across from the Sunday school table, that the Sunday lunch counter this past Sunday, are both believers. Quote, we're looking for a church home in Raleigh, they both said. We want a place where we can live as Christians without being surrounded by anti-gay, anti-vaccination attitudes, end quote. When I came to ask how they became so intentional in their faith, both told stories of dysfunctional families and church youth groups that welcomed them with open arms and open hearts. It's the kind of testimony I heard more than once from college students at Georgetown. It made me give thanks once again for the investment that congregations make in their youth ministry and for the transformational experiences of my own youth group at a church in Western Kentucky many years ago. These two young ladies are, as I say, bucking the trends of their generation. Dr. Burge, who also happens to be a Baptist pastor while teaching at a state university and also a guest in the Meetinghouse a few months ago, his research shows that only 1/3 of their peers are Christians of any kind, evangelical, Protestant, Catholic, while 10% of their peers adhere to some other religion, and 10% are what the scholars call unclassified. The biggest group in their generation are atheists, agnostics, and the unaffiliated. When it comes to ethnic identity, Dr. Burge writes, Hispanic members are easily the most Christian racial group among Gen Z, and they are the only racial group among whom Christians outnumber the nones, N-O-N-E-S. Finally, Burge points out the obvious, quote, every day in America, hundreds of people from the silent generation, that would be my parents, and the boomers, that's my group, are dying off and are replaced by members of Generation Z, 45% of whom are nuns, you remember. Generation Z, having their 18th birthday. This by itself, he says, will make the United States much less religious in 2030 than it was in 2020. This may be the word from the statisticians and the scholars, and I take them seriously, but the testimony coming to me this past Sunday was very different. And the word from these two college students, commitment to living as Christians, is similar to the word I heard from millennials at scores of festivals for young preachers during the last decade. Time and time again, an older minister, perhaps somebody my age, would mutter to me after hearing one of the young preachers, "This is the most hopeful event I've been to in a long time," end quote. My heart ached this past Sunday as I listened to these two young adults describe both the discord in their families of origin and also the dedication in their own hearts. Both aspire to be teachers in high school, public high schools. Listening to their testimonies gave me an additional layer of hope that regardless of what the scholars say about where we are headed as a nation, I remain hopeful. And as I pray for the soul of the nation, I do so having been lifted up and blessed by the hundreds of young people who have not bowed the knee to Baal, to use an old biblical phrase, nor abandoned the call to know Christ and the power of his resurrection. It was a good Sunday last week, but not primarily because of what happened in the sanctuary. I'm Dwight Moody in the Meetinghouse. I'll be back in just a minute. You've been in the Meetinghouse today with me. I'm your host, Dr. Dwight A. Moody, coming to you from our studio in North Carolina. I encourage you to visit our website at themeetinghouse.net. There you will find all the commentaries, including the one I just read to you, book reviews, and I think even perhaps my review of Tom Krattenmaker's book, Confessions of a Secular Jesus Follower. I encourage you to join our Circle of 70. These are people who believe in what we're doing here, having civil conversation about matters of great importance to our nation. I talk with people all across the political and religious spectrum, from the most liberal to the most conservative, from those who are Christians to Muslims, Jews, even secularists. And if you believe in what we're doing, I invite you to support our work. We're looking for 70 donors. We now have 28. You could join our group of 70. We call it the Circle of 70. We're trying to raise over the next 6 months $24,000 to fund our work. We use that to send coffee to all of our guests, like we did to Tom, to pay for our airtime, to buy books that I review, to buy the equipment that we have and that we use. You can go to the meetinghouse.net/support and learn how you can support us, and you can send a donation. Thank you for listening today, coming to you over our network, the meetinghouse.net. We broadcast on YouTube and on Facebook Live. All of these things are archived as podcasts, so you can go to the meetinghouse.net/podcast and listen to any of our programs. I don't know, we're up to 60 or 70, maybe 80 podcasts on the website. Very interesting people. Some of them are nationally known and national writers like Tom Krattenmaker. And some of them are converts moving in and out of their Christian history, joining the Catholic Church or opting out of the Catholic Church. I want to thank you for listening today. I want to thank my engineer, Everett Armstrong, in the studio in the Golden Isles of Georgia, which is our home base, and Alex Mattingly in Louisville, which is our new base. And of course, I'm right between them in North Carolina, Hendersonville, beautiful Hendersonville, North Carolina. I want to thank Tom for being my guest today. I'm sure many people will want to go back and listen to this show and listen to our conversation. If you have a recommendation about somebody that needs to be a guest in the Meeting House, write me. I'm glad to hear from you. We're always glad to hear from our viewers and listeners. You can write me at the meetinghouse.net. As a matter of fact, if you go to the meetinghouse.net, at the bottom of every page, there is a response form, and you can send me a message. Or you can call me. You can text me. I'm on Twitter at Dwight A. Moody. I think I'm up to 420 followers now, maybe 25. I'm not really shaking things up in the Twitter world. Thank you for listening. I encourage you to get a vaccine. We in the Meeting House we're on the side of those that think everybody ought to have a vaccine. I have been vaccinated. I hope you are as well. Be safe. Do justice. Love mercy, as the great Hebrew prophet said. Drink some coffee. Order some coffee from my friends out in California. Send a donation to the Meeting House. We need it. Pray for the soul of America. You know, I am in a prayer group every week, and we gather on Zoom to pray for the soul of America, for the economy, for the pandemic, for our national leaders, our local leaders. I hope you are praying for our country. Be kind to everyone. Give thanks in all things. In the Meeting House, I'm Dwight Moody. Join us again next week, and have a great day.
You have been in the Meeting House with host Dwight A. Moody. Thank you for watching or listening today. Visit our website at themeetinghouse.net for more news, reviews, commentaries, and conversation on religion